On October 13, 2013, John James Lace Sr. is admitted to hospital in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, with inexplicable symptoms. His eventual death is ruled 100% natural by Nova Scotia's chief medical examiner. His son Kevin says it was murder.
My earliest memories would be most likely my father with me. I was riding large horses. We had Clydesdale horses. I remember riding on Clydesdale horses. Our family, I guess, with today's standards would be considered a large family, but at the time it was relatively normal. There were 6 children in total, 3 boys, 3 girls. I was the youngest boy. I was born in '67. And I've always had a closer relationship with my father than with my mother. And I don't really know why that's always been, but it was just the case. The dynamics in the family were always kind of odd. If there was anything I needed, anyone I could talk to, literally anything at all, it didn't matter if it was a positive or a negative, it was my father that I could go to. My father was the one that would, hug you if you needed a hug. I've never really been hugged by my mother in my life. And for him, it was really important that everybody did what was right, no matter the consequence. You had to do what was right. My mother was not cut from the same cloth. In August of 2013, I think it was August 30th, I saw Dad at his home in Cloverville, Antigonish County. And Dad was great. He was talkative, he was perfectly fine. So it was a really pleasant meeting. And everything seemed smooth. There didn't seem to be any abnormalities or whatsoever until I received a phone call, and I think it was a Friday, October 11th, 2013. And it was my dad calling me because he was in great distress. So I asked him if I could speak to Mom. He put her on the phone, and I asked her if she would, have my brother, who lives next door, take him to the hospital or something. You can't. He's in a lot of pain. She said no, she's not going to bother him. So I asked her if she would call the ambulance. And she didn't want to pay for an ambulance if it wasn't anything that would keep him in. So I told her not to worry, I would pay for the ambulance.
When John James Lace Sr. was admitted to hospital on October 13, 2013, he was complaining about the inability to urinate, having delusions, and vomiting. Not finding any medical reason for these symptoms, he was eventually released on November 26, 2013. Just one day later, on November 27th, he was readmitted to hospital with the same symptoms displayed on October 13th.
He's having not just the problem with the urination, he's also vomiting this chocolatey coffee grounds, and it's got the same white, powdery, dough-like substance all intermixed through it, like a black and white sauce, so to speak. But when the nurse was going to put a catheter in him, she had been instructed by Dr. Sturmey to make it a permanent thing. They decided that that's what they would do. So they did it in and out, and they drained him, but he was still vomiting this weird substance. I couldn't figure out what that was. The doctors that I spoke to had no idea what was causing that.
By December 5th, 2013, in a family meeting, it was determined that John would live with his son Kevin and daughter-in-law Carmen for the winter. However, unbeknownst to Kevin and Carmen, a no-code was ordered on John by Dr. Sturmey, his wife Rose, and the remaining family members.
The siblings were there. They were saying no to Halifax, no way, no how. So it's like, okay, This is different. We thought we were coming there to set up everything, put everything in order, get him discharged, home care at our house for the winter. Him and her, Rose and John, come with us. And then we get to that meeting at 9 a.m. It's totally no.
And Dr. Sturmey is talking about the care, and he said it works best for the living. And he was talking about how my father right now, the best thing for him would be if he went under his care on the 4th floor in the hospital. A week ago, you released him, and there was nothing wrong with him. Now, you're ordering a no code on him, and they're all agreeing with you. That is my siblings and my mother, not the attending nurses, not the attending physiotherapists. They're objecting to it. They can't believe that you want to put a no code on this guy. For what reason? For what purpose? And what's unique about that is that what Dr. Sturmey explained it to be is that if in the event that he has any type of an incident in the hospital, that there would be no medical intervention to assist him in saving his life. So if you're in distress, you're in distress until you pass away. And to ensure that it doesn't bother other patients, he would put you in a single room with a double locked door that's more soundproof, therefore it wouldn't disturb other people.
On December 7th, Kevin and Carmen go to visit his father at the hospital in Antigonish, and what they see breaks their hearts. John has been left alone for hours, frightened, cold, with no blankets or water, and no one responding to the emergency call button he's been pushing for hours.
And I went back to my father's room and I said, there was nothing I can do. You can't come with me, Dad. They won't let you. He told me to go and open a box he had given me when I had seen him back in August. He called it his little lock box. And he asked me to open it. There was papers in it. In that lockbox, there was a power of attorney document that Dad had given me.
This grants Kevin the power to remove the no code ordered by Dr. Sturmey.
I advised the hospital under the power of attorney I wanted my father released. I was taking him home to me. And that I had made arrangements for Fall River Family Practice, where I'm a patient, to come to the home if necessary, to tend to my father whenever necessary. And they agreed to do that for me.
Kevin and Carmen immediately head to Antigonish from their home in Enfield to see his father in the hospital. Once there, Kevin sees Dr. Sturmey hastily leaving his father's room. Kevin captures his father on video stating, "Sturmey is in on it. Call the Mounties. I do not want to die."
What was going on? Who were you talking? What were you saying about Sturmey?
He in on it.
In on what?
Well, taking the powder and all that stuff. He in on it. Wasn't he?
Did they give you some powder?
Well, they give me something, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay, they shouldn't have given me anything. I was too good of a customer for that.
Are you in any pain anywhere right now, or you just feel numb?
And then I feel stupefied.
You feel stupefied.
Yeah.
And he had told me that they had taken that from him, and that he almost froze the night before, that it was really cold in the room, and he didn't have sheets. And the only thing he's going to tell me, that you're doing something to him, that you're forcing him to take a white powder. And that as long as he doesn't take that white powder, he's fine. And the white powder makes him stupefied. Dr. Sturmey called me that morning. He was furious, absolutely furious. He was going on about how his mother, he had insurance on his mother. He had term life insurance on his mother, and that policy was expired. And he didn't collect on that insurance because his family fought him instead of allowing him to put her in his comfort care program. And it was something like $250 a day it cost him. And he ended up losing money. And then in policy, he didn't even get his premium. He got nothing out of the policy because she lived past her 80th birthday. She died, she was 83 or something like that. And here he is telling me that the best thing for my father is for him to die. I see Dr. Sturmey coming out of his room, and he goes directly across the hallway, and there's a couple of no admittance doors, and he disappears down through there. I go into my dad's room, and my father's not at all. He's the opposite of what he was just, half hour, 40 minutes earlier when we had left this room, when we had evening dinner with him. He was in a lot of distress, and he was going on about how he was just forced to take some of this white powder. He was talking about Dr. Sturmey being in on it. He was in a very weird mood. He kept telling me he felt stupefied, that he was being fed this white powder again. He was being forced to take this white powder, and that they were rolling him backwards when he wasn't opening his mouth, and they were pulling his head back so that he would open his mouth to take this powder, this white powder. And he told me they were trying to kill him.
And they want to die, kill me.
They want to kill you?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to kill you, and you're not going to die.
Well, I hope not.
John is released from the hospital on December 10th, and he and his wife Rose go to live with Kevin and Carmen. Kevin spares no expense in the medical care of his father. Everything is going well. John is resting comfortably and seemingly healing. What Carmen realizes is that his father is always in distress when he's left home alone with Rose.
But after those x-rays, I finally got the discharge papers, and I arranged for an ambulance to take my father from Antigonish to my home in Enfield that day. And I felt relief. My father was really happy. We had gotten him out of, or so we thought, out of harm's way, away from Dr. Sturmey. So then Friday morning, we're awakened. Dad is telling me that he doesn't want to die in my house. That he needs me to call an ambulance for him. That he didn't want to die in my house. And that he needed to get her away from him. And that's my mother he's talking about. Telling me he was stupefied and he had been fed this white powder, and that he was, only this time it was her he was referring to. I got a call from nurses that had arrived at my father's house because he was comatose. And he had bruises. He was quite bruised up, bloody. It looked like something violent had happened in his bedroom. My mother asked us to go out to Walmart to buy some baby powder and Special K. Special K cornflakes. I didn't have a clue what she meant when she was saying Special K, but I certainly do now. I arrived at the hospital early on the 18th that morning. We'd received a phone call that my father was in distress. And when I got there, they told me he hadn't moved as I was entering the room all night. And when he looked at me when I entered the room, and he sat up and he said, Rose did it. Rose killed me. There was 3 nurses at the end of the bed. They all heard what he said. I didn't comprehend it. So I remember sitting him back because he leaned up to hug me. So I sat him back and said, "What did you say?" And he said, "Rose did it. Rose killed me." Rose killed me. I laid him back on his pillow. He never moved again. He died later that day, that evening. He died after supper that night.
In preparation for his father's funeral, Kevin and Carmen discover several prescriptions in John's name they were unaware of, and no photos of Kevin or John. Kevin initially reports his father's death as a homicide to the RCMP in Stellarton, Nova Scotia, but he is dismissed. At the same time, Dr. Sturmey reports John's death as 100% natural to the same RCMP unit, and it is accepted. On February 28th, Kevin reports the death of his father to Detective Penny Hart of the RCMP HRP Integrated Major Crime Unit in Halifax as a homicide.
And so I went to see Detective Penny Hart. Detective Hart opened a homicide file after meeting with me for just over an hour. Carmen and I went to see Dr. Bose on the morning of March the 3rd. We just drove to the medical examiner's office. Never been there before, but I went there. We met with Nurse Shauna Curley, and it wasn't a very long meeting. It was short. It was in a side room just off the entranceway. And we showed her my father's videos, and we gave her a copy of it from December the 9th. She told me that she would be speaking. She was going to go immediately and speak with the Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Matthew Bose. I had a phone call from Shauna Curley, and she told me that she had showed my father's video to Dr. Bose, Dr. Matthew Bose, and that he immediately called for my father's remains that were in the crypt, frozen in the crypt in Antigonish, to be transported to his office immediately for autopsy.
On March 7th, 2014, Dr. Matthew Bose, Chief Medical Examiner, performs the autopsy in the presence of Detective Penny Hart. He declares the death of John as 100% natural. The Chief Medical Examiner keeps custody of the specimens for 38 days, and then he ships them to NMS Labs. The specimens include liver, spleen, and vitreous fluid. Natasha Verndon logs in 4 specimens as being received from the Nova Scotia Medical Examiner's office. The Chief Medical Examiner contacts NMS Labs in Willow Grove and asks for several lab tests, including the test for ketamine and other drugs of abuse, be omitted from testing. Ketamine is used by vets to subdue large animals, such as elephants and horses. When used illegally, it is called Special K, the date rape drug, where the victim experiences hallucinations, immobility, and complete amnesia after the fact. 2 months later, in a meeting with the Chief Medical Examiner, the detective, and lawyers for Kevin, it is revealed for the very first time that his father had citalopram in his system, an antidepressant, only his father wasn't depressed. When used illegally, it makes you agreeable and easily manipulated. Before his father's death, Kevin and Carmen became increasingly suspicious of what was happening. In a moment of instinct and foresight, Carmen cut samples of her father-in-law's hair and sealed them as potential evidence of foul play.
I took a sample of his hair because I knew it could be tested if we had it to in the future. Because during his hospital stay, one day he was okay, the next day he was comatose, and the next day he was okay. So it was like strange. I was like, what is going on? So I took a sample of his hair and I put it in a baggie and I put it in my purse. And when we arrived home that night, we put it in a lockbox. On July 28, 2014, Kevin and I traveled to France. We had a meeting with Ken Tox Laboratories in France with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Vincent Sirimel. We showed him the videos of John in hospital where he says he feels stupefied. He's being fed a white powder. So we had only asked him to test for citalopram, see if he had excess citalopram in his system. But once he saw the video of John saying he's stupefied and it's the white powder they're feeding him, he asked us if it was okay if we could test for other drug classes, including like ketamine. And because ketamine is known to be a white powder and it makes you stupefied if you take it in excess. And then it took 4 days for him to do the testing. And on August 1st, we met with Vincent Ceramel and we discovered that John had illicit drugs in his system, ketamine, and other drugs that weren't prescribed to him in hospital, that we discovered on August 1st. So after that discovery, we flew home and we delivered those results to Dr. Matthew Bowes at the Nova Scotia Medical Examiner's Office, because his toxicology from NMS Labs did not show ketamine and all those drugs that ChemTox found. So we wanted him to get to the bottom of why there was conflicting toxicologies. On September 19, 2014, Dr. Matthew Bowes contacted NMS Labs to do testing on the specimens they were holding. Matthew Bowes asked the lab to use the diluted specimen they received, dilute it further, then test for ketamine. And also what they did is they raised the reporting limit 4 times. So the report came back as non-detected for ketamine. Well, of course it's not going to be detected for ketamine or anything because you have a diluted specimen 400 times, a watered down specimen, and you have reporting limits raised, so therefore non-detected. They do as the client requests, and that client was Dr. Matthew Bowes. In December 2014, Dr. Bowes provided a fraudulent autopsy report supported by a fraudulent toxicology report. He had to do this because he had to support his finding of 100% natural death that he made on the date of autopsy, which was March 7, 2014. Dr. Bowes worked hard to discredit it. He kept saying maybe the hair was contaminated, external contamination. So all this notion that Dr. Bowes was trying to tell us, oh, it's probably external contamination, we disproved that. So once we showed those results to Dr. Bowes, the norketamine results, in November 2015, guess what he does? He asked the lab to dispose of all the specimens they have in their storage. Kevin and I traveled to NMS Labs. We go to Pennsylvania. So we just showed up. We demanded a meeting with the vice president. We have a meeting. It lasts 90 minutes. We asked why are these reporting limits raised. They said they do as each client requests. They don't just arbitrarily raise stuff. They do as the client requests. During the meeting, they tell us they will provide us with the complete toxicology file. A couple weeks later, we received 1,154 pages of toxicology report. That's excessive in a natural death. We discover an email written by Laura LeVay. In her email, she states, I am still editing the file. The file contains 1,692 pages. She's doing the second round of edits. We received 1,154 pages. She says there's 1,692. So we know there's 538 pages that she pulled out, she edited, are missing, that we want. We retained Kevin Shanks from Axis Laboratories. He's a chemical analyst. He reviewed the 1,154 pages that we received from NMS. Kevin Shanks' report shows reporting limits were raised, specimens were watered down. They discarded the liver, the spleen, and the vitreous fluid.
In January of 2018, our lawyer Robert Pinio made application to the courts to exhume my dad. It's a private family matter. It involved no one but myself, my wife Carmen, and the court. On the day of that hearing, the Department of Justice arrived, senior lawyer Michael Pugsley. And he stormed the castle, if you will, and took over the hearing. He decided that the judge should entertain an argument from him that we be forced to have our application to exhume my father stayed, and in essence give the Department of Justice notice under the Proceeding Against the Crown Act. But yet they arrived at the courthouse, and what seemed to be a pre-rehearsed state, Justice Smith allowed them complete control of the courtroom. She did allow them to bring in this Proceeding Against the Crown Act. And despite having over 4 years and almost monthly notices that we were trying to exhume my father, which is why they knew about this court date to begin with, is the fact that we had given them notice, courtesy notice, back in November, December. In fact, I don't think a month passed that we had not given them notice. And the end result was simple. Justice Annie Smith did exactly the same thing she did in January of 2018. She canceled my motion to exhume my dad once again. And when we got to the courtroom, that was quite the show. At the commencement of the courtroom, and I have the transcript, Department of Justice senior lawyer, Mr. Kuriani, spoke. He rose to speak to the court. He said, "I just wanted to make one preliminary comment, not about the substance of the affidavit," this being the affidavits of Carmen Blinn, who had provided evidence to support that the evidence, our evidence, should not all be struck. And he said, "Not about the substance of the affidavit, but I believe my lady made it very clear at the teleconference on September 29th that there would not be affidavit evidence as part of this motion. It would be briefs only. In that way, I don't think the affidavit filed October 26th is properly before the court." What he's referring to is an October 26th affidavit filed by Carmen Blinn, and she attached to that a tremendous number of documents that supported the factual basis of our evidence for the court. The court decided that they would take a look at this affidavit and then have further discussions when they returned. This is what Justice Annie Smith said. "All right, so I've had a chance to review the affidavit of Carmen Blinn filed on October 26, 2020. When we had a conference call in preparation for today's hearing, my recollection is that we all agreed, or counsel all agreed, and you were represented, Mr. Lays and Miss Blinn, by counsel at the time, that there would be no affidavits filed on this motion, that it would consist entirely of legal submissions." What she's saying, essentially, is that I'm not allowed to give any evidence. We're going to have a 3-day hearing, and that I, through my lawyer, Michael Donovan, I and Carmen Blinn, we agreed there would be no evidence. And that was her recollection from the September 29th conference call by telephone. On September 29th, during that 1-hour conference call, we have the transcript. Neither Carmen, myself, or Mr. Donovan agreed to any such thing. It was not agreed to. But yet, she was proposing, as was Mr. Kuriani, that it was agreed to. And I'd like to read to you exactly what the other lawyers in attendance had to say that day. Mr. Kuriani, this is after she came back into the room, after seeing that we wanted to present evidence. Thank you, my lady. As your ladyship has indicated during the conference call on September 29th, it was made very clear, and all counsel agreed, there would be no affidavit evidence on this motion. The filing deadlines were set for submissions and not affidavits. So therefore, the defendants, and when I refer to the defendants, I mean the Attorney General of Nova Scotia and Dr. Bose, are of the position that the affidavit of Miss Blinn, filed October 26th, is not properly before the court on this motion. So, like Justice Smith, he has the same recollection that we agreed we wouldn't provide any evidence during a 3-day motion, dealing strictly with striking all of my evidence. Evidence it took 6 years to acquire. Evidence of international experts, some of which Nova Scotia has never seen before. One of whom, Dr. Gail Audrey-Ann Cooper, Director of Toxicology from New York City, was named by the Supreme Court of Canada as the world's foremost toxicology expert. And yet, they're just going to strike it. They're just going to throw it out. They're all ready to testify. They're all ready to testify to their independence. They're ready to testify to what has happened with my father. And they're all calling it a suspicious death. And most likely a murder, a premeditated murder. I want to read for you what Mr. Colin Clark QC, partner at Cox Palmer, had to say. And this is just shocking. Thank you, my lady. I think the first point that we would like to make, and I make it with significant vigor, is my recollection of the telephone conference call is consistent with your memory and with Mr. Kuriani's, which is that there would be no additional affidavits on this motion, and for that reason, I think that the affidavit should not be permitted as part of this motion. Again, he's referring to the affidavit motion or the affidavit evidence of Carmen Blinn. Our evidence to support our evidence. He's remembering something with significant vigor that never happened. And to show that it never happened, we're providing the entire transcript of that conference call from September the 29th. So you've got the judge remembering something that never happened. You've got Mr. Kuriani, Department of Justice lawyer, remembering something that never happened. And although I didn't read her, Miss Agnes McNeil, senior lawyer with the Department of Justice, she recalled it as well. Mr. Colin Clark QC with Cox Palmer, he remembers it with significant vigor. It never happened. But he's not alone. There's still more lawyers yet to chime in. Yes. Mr. Scott Campbell, partner at Stewart McKelvey, the largest firm here in Atlantic Canada. And Miss Sarah Walsh, Stewart McKelvey lawyer, both representing NMS Labs. Representing NMS Labs to try to keep my dad's body in the ground so that we can't find out the truth about how he died by doing proper science. Something that they've been doing since 2014. This is what Mr. This is what Mr. Scott Campbell had to say. Thank you, my lady. I'll speak to this point and would certainly echo the comments from my friends, Mr. Kuriani and Mr. Clark. So he remembers it too. He also remembers something that never happened. And he's swearing to that in court. He's an officer of the court, just as all the other lawyers are. And they are all remembering something that never happened. They're all in the courtroom telling lies. And they're blatant, unmistakable lies. And they have no problem. And they have no problem lying. You've got now Stuart McKelvey, no problem. Not one lawyer. Sarah Walsh had no problem with telling the lie either. The Department of Justice lawyers have no problem telling lies. And the judge herself had no problem telling a lie. And when someone lies, they're a liar. That's what they are. But this is indisputable. This is indisputable what they've done. And they're all doing it. And they're doing it in unison. And the performance they put on in that courtroom was unbelievable. For 3 days, I was constantly reminded that I wasn't allowed to give evidence. On December the 8th, Justice Ann Smith made a ruling from the October hearing to strike all my evidence. After 6.5 years. And I don't know how many times to the courtroom. And at that point, I had spent about $1.2 million.
Dr. Matthew Bowes, when confronted with the first toxicology of the hair specimen, 2 days later, he burns the body. Then, in 2015 of November, he's confronted with the second hair results. And the same day, a couple hours later, he instructs the lab to destroy the remaining specimens.
To keep a body in the ground that they knew didn't even exist, for the sole purpose of not holding the people responsible for what's happened. And it's not just about the people that actually killed my dad. It's about the people in positions of authority that should have done the right thing. Just one time. Just do the right thing. How hard is that?